This is Taking the Lead, a podcast for B2B tech professionals, leaders, and executives who want to learn from female icons in the tech industry. In each episode, host Christina Brady interviews women who are driving revenue for some of the most respected tech companies in the world. Are you ready to get inspired?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Taking the Lead. I am Christina Brady. I am the Chief Strategy Officer of Sales Assembly. If you don't know what we are the all-in organization that helps you to be fast and focused from your people to your infrastructure. So if you are a scaling B2B SaaS company, this is a resource exactly for you to help you scale faster and do that in a way that impacts every individual in your go-to-market org, from training to certifications to support to advisory and more. I am excited today to be sitting down with Margaret Weniger.
Oh
Margaret,
my gosh.
welcome.
Hi. I'm so excited to be here. This is a treat. I've been hoping this day would come.
Yes. Well, you have a show as well. And so I was very excited just to vibe with you because I love interviewing other podcast hosts. One, because you tend to be a jolly and interesting bunch. And two, you have a lot of incredible things to say. And so I'm gonna pull as much of that incredibleness out of you today. But first, this right now is a little bit of the merger of two really, really big parts of your professional and also somewhat personal life. So tell us your journey and fill everyone in on what I mean by this moment where it is kind of culminating all together. What
Yes.
brings us here?
Oh, yes. The very quick version is I fell backwards into tech sales a couple years out of college. I was a swimmer and they needed somebody who could speak the swimming lingo. And so I got my first sales job as an account executive working at a software company out in San Diego. And I loved it. About a year in, I got my first flavor for management. And I had always wanted that. I'd always been in leadership roles growing up. And it was like a dream come true. And it was a very painful couple of years. I definitely cut my teeth on that first group of hires I had, learned so much, and then went through a big acquisition and ended up relocating to Atlanta. Got an opportunity to run the sales development team at Sales Loft, was able to take that team from 8 to 24. Just had so much fun going through that kind of high growth stage. And then ended up attempting to go to a smaller startup. Learned that that was not for me. I tend to do better at a little bit larger, a little bit more resource company, but went to a very early stage company with 3 sales reps, grew the team up, built out SDR function, ran the AE team. And then I took a stint off of sales leadership and we did a group called Girls Club. And it was focused on getting more women into sales leadership. And it was my first flavor of I felt that first inkling of this feels right. I don't know what this is. I always thought sales leadership, linear career path, but there was something about it that just felt so right. And so I did that for a year and then had an incredible opportunity to run the North American sales team at MindBody and take over 100+ person organization. And I couldn't pass that up. It had been something I'd really been wanting to do something at scale, but also again, having resources. And I knew I had the capacity for it. And so got to come in, do that. 6 months into this transformation, COVID hit and we served the salon and spa market, which was just decimated. And so I think, many of you probably know the rest of that story. And we ended up, I started the podcast that I do, Rising Tide, in October of 2020. I needed a creative, cathartic outlet to get to connect with other incredible women. And this is where I started interviewing women to tell their stories behind their career. And I ended up learning a ton. And my position was then eliminated in February of 2021. And what was really great about it is I had probably known now for 2 years that I was not meant to be in sales leadership. But it took me a very long time to come to peace with that. Again, I just spent a decade focused on building this career path. I was not willing to give that up. And yet my heart was being pulled in this other direction and my purpose was just somewhere else. And so now after that transition from mind body, I knew it was time to give life to that voice. And so I launched Rising Tide formally. There was the podcast in Rising Tide, which is focused on transforming the workplace to be built for human beings rather than ideal workers. And you'll see me talk primarily about women, because I believe that creating a balance of masculine and feminine energy and positions of power, that's how we're going to do it. So I talk a lot because the gap right now is in getting women elevated into those roles or in starting companies. So that's kind of me in a nutshell. And so yeah, so I'm so excited here because there has been a lot of epiphanies. It's been a very high growth year. And with the podcast, I've interviewed now over 60 women. And what's been fascinating is there's been these patterns and themes that I've seen. And you were one of the amazing women that I got to learn from. And so now in hindsight, I started to see where things that I knew in sales leadership that I thought were very exclusive to being successful in that role actually are very valuable in life. Mm. So that's what I'm so excited because there's been a lot of moments in these recent months.
It's such a good nutshell, and there's so much to dig into there. I think the first thing is it takes a lot of bravery for somebody to realize, one, what they want to do, and then two, to maybe recognize what they don't want to do and what's not a great fit, especially when they have made the kind of strides and advancement that you have. The idea of saying, maybe this really isn't for me when you've made it so far is terrifying. How did you come to terms with that?
What a beautiful question. And I thank you for calling it out because it has been super hard. I just want to be
Yeah.
very, very clear. It has been a very painful experience for several reasons. One is I was very much and am still working through like identity and title being married. And
Mm.
so the first probably year, honestly, after people saying, "What do you do?" I cringed. I hated getting asked that question because I just felt so lost. And I remember like this idea of like there was like glamour around being able to say what I was when I was a sales leader, but now it's like I don't know what to tell you. And then people's reaction too, you've got to deal with them being like, "Oh, okay, we don't really fit in a box. I understand." So so that there was that process has been very helpful, but also very painful. And then, for a long time, I really struggled to see the transferable skills. This is great. This is gonna seem so ludicrous, but I share this because it helps. Like I mean, I hope others who maybe have the blinders up like I did realize just how much of a box you might accidentally have put yourself in. When I did the podcast, I remember like almost on a regular basis, people would be like, "Gosh, you are such a great interviewer." And I just couldn't understand it because I'm like, "I don't know what I'm doing. I've never done a podcast. I have no idea what I'm doing." And finally, I mean, it took like 6 months of getting this regular feedback and people I trusted, people whose opinions I actually valued. Finally, I was like, "Well, what's this all about? Like, what is this?" And then I started to think, I'm like, "Hang on a sec. I have spent 10 years building and scaling high growth teams that I had to hire and interview thousands of people.
Yeah.
So I literally spent a decade of my life getting really proficient at asking people questions to understand the why behind the what. And so, it's just like things like that where like so it's been an interesting process of like learning that like these things that I learned, they still hold value. I didn't just lose this piece of me. I'm not starting from scratch. So that's I mean, I thank you for asking that question because it's been a very it's required a lot of growth, a lot of, like, reestablishing beliefs that I held that I needed to update, and, it's been very liberating and, like, the feeling I have when I'm working on things with Rising Tide, like, I could feel it in my bones, which has helped. There's definitely been this gravitational pull to go back to what I know, and yet I have to like then I remind myself of what I feel like and how alive I feel when I work on Rising Tide things. And that's enough to remind me to stay there, stay with it, hang on. Like you're going to continue figuring this out. It's going to keep getting better and it'll grow. You've already done this once in another career path.
And I have to imagine that what you're doing now I almost said scratches the box. And what I meant was scratches the itch or checks the box. And it scratches the box because you're helping people to improve on what they're doing through your experience while not doing it themselves. Like you are like the penultimate coach, where you're like, I have done it. I was good at it. I'm not going to do it anymore, but I'm going to help you do it a heck of a
Yeah.
lot better. And so I have to imagine that in your time looking at the companies that you've worked at, one, it's funny to me that you're like a little bit of a bigger company with more resources is where I'm comfortable, except for now where I'm a solo founder and an amazing company.
Right.
I'm I'm gonna settle there. It's like where life takes us, and I think it's beautiful.
Yes.
Like, that's where you've wound up.
Well,
It's
it's funny because like right before I left my body, like I was really kind of coming to this concept of like I was really feeling this pull to like more of a GM role because I loved as a sales. Part of what was
Ooh,
difficult about being a sales leader is I was don't get mad at me, folks. I got bored. I was bored. It wasn't challenging enough. I was always very fascinated in how it interacted and engaged with all the other parts of the business. And that was one of my superpowers. I was very proficient at cross-functional relationships and aligning and understanding their business and how we work together. And so I was interested in like in GM positions and running a business unit and being able to either influence or oversee parts of the entire business, not just one piece of it. And so it's funny because I do like to work with experts and tap them for expertise. And so, but then I also have this side of me that like really likes to do all the things because it's challenging and keeps me engaged. But yes, it has been a little bit of a humble pill to be like, all right, well, you're gonna bootstrap this sucker for now, for now, for
for
now,
now, not
not always.
always. And I also think that the experience that you have your first time in a leadership role is huge because I've seen several examples of people who would be phenomenal leaders. And there's so much that goes into leadership, and what calls them to it initially has always been the qualitative piece of wanting to help people advance in their careers and wanting to coach and wanting to solve problems and wanting to inspire and wanting to take risks, like all of the good things. And yet, if their first leadership experience isn't a good one, maybe they inherited an underperforming team. And maybe they're working at a company that doesn't invest enough in their people. Maybe nobody is hitting target. Maybe the target is wrong. Maybe they don't have the brand that they need. Maybe they're not getting autonomy, like all of those things, where then they go, wow, I got into this and I had no idea what leadership actually was. This is not for me. And it's really hard to sit with that person and say, well, okay, maybe leadership is for you, but not this job. Or maybe leadership isn't for you. And I think you've had the ability to experience leadership and show one, you're really good at it, but the role isn't for you. I think because you're called to a higher purpose, like you are called to making a larger impact. But I encourage people to do that too. Like, is leadership wrong for you, or is this job at this company not the right leadership role for you? And to fully explore that.
Mm.
How do you think people do that and actually determine properly, since you've done it? It's just this job, or actually
Oh
leadership
my
isn't for
gosh.
me?
What God, I love your question. So great. Because it's so interesting because I'll say this really quick and then I am going to answer the question. My first job, so my second year in, I had inherited an underperforming team. I basically had to fire 6 out of the 10 reps I had, and I got to rebuild it, which was awesome. I mean, it
Ooh,
was painful, but it was also really fun because I basically got to create my own team. So
yeah.
first year, great, but high turnover. Second year, performance reviews came around. I got annihilated in the reviews, annihilated. And what the biggest mistake that I had done is I at the time was very much like work is work and home is home, and I was very compartmentalized. I had really high standards, and I hadn't quite learned the lesson of what is what is good enough versus like what do we need to actually push on that needs to be great, and also like understanding like does it accomplish the goal even if it's different than how I do it. So I hadn't learned that yet, and so
Mm.
thankfully I had a manager at the time who she wouldn't even give me the reviews, they were so bad, but she's like, I
Oh,
do think we
no.
can glean some information out of this. And she ended up kind of sharing kind of the highlights, if you will, and then she said, "You have the choice. You can either grow from this and we can work on it, or you can go back to an individual contributor role. That's fine too." And again, I think looking inside and saying, "I want this and I'm willing to work." And it then the next year was again another very painful growth year, but I grew so much from that experience. I was so grateful. Shannon Stewart, an amazing manager who gave me the opportunity to grow from it, learn from it. And it was when I started to realize how much of a responsibility I had as a manager. So, I think I was very fortunate to have a manager who navigated that for me beautifully, and she helped guide me through. What I've realized is it's funny. this is one of these things where I see a parallel between sales leadership and individual, like, like as a person, kind of guiding principles. And so, like, I think about it in the terms of, in go to market strategies, you have ICPs, right? Like, you have
Yep.
your ideal customer profile. And this is as a company, like, you do a lot of work, right? You do a lot of research because it's really important that you have focus. Who are we going after? How do we know who we need to say no to? What is misaligned with where we're ultimately trying to get? And then how do we create alignment within our organization so that we are all rowing in the same direction and we're not doing activities that are counterproductive to one another? And so I think about that. There's a lot of research that goes into it. And then what's neat too about the ICP is that you can update it as your company grows, as you acquire new information. You can expand into new markets. You can go up market, you can go down market, you can go into different industries. And so I see this where it's actually quite true in our lives, where to answer your question, it's understanding who you are at this moment in time of what do I value? So what's really important to me? What are my strengths that I have? So who am I? And I'm a huge fan of Gallup strength finders. Like if you struggle with your strength, just take the
Ah,
assessment. It's such a helpful way to articulate what makes you really special. And then you need to know like what area of your life is really important to you. Because I mean, you might want to manage, but this might not be the time in life where you have the time or energy or desire to focus there. So understanding what dimension of my life is important. If it's your career, maybe that's the right. Maybe it's your relationships in your personal life, and that's, work is important, but it's not the driving force. And so having that as your foundation. So then when faced with really difficult situations, when faced with opportunities, you have qualification standards. Now you can say no without feeling guilt. You can walk away from the deal, if you will, without feeling guilty because you have your criteria of what does or does not work for you. And what's great about it as a person is that you can update it as you acquire new information, you learn new things, and you can either expand it or update it. So I love, I think for me, that's kind of been a big thing of how to think about it. If you take like how you think about sales and just translate it into your personal life, you use the same format, just with a different foundation of what you're using as inputs.
oh, I love that. And just this idea of, look, you can either something happens to you, you can either run from that experience or learn
Mhm.
from it.
Yes.
I think I just quoted Rafiki from The Lion King, but man, what a wise monkey. Like, and he's right,
Well,
It's like
speaking of Lion King, I think there's one other thing that's very wise in there that I think is like, the part with Simba where they say, Simba, remember who you are. And I think this
yeah.
is something, and this is like such a random thought, but I love that because I think especially, and I don't know if this is true for men, but I'll speak for women. What I've seen is that sometimes we lose ourselves along the way. What I have found really interesting about the podcast and interviewing these women is so often what ends up happening is they get pushed and pulled around in their lives because they're really good at a lot of things. And they're not trying to be unintentional, but what they realize is that later on, they kind of reconnect with their younger self and it's like they remember who they've always been. She just got buried a little bit over the years. And so in Lion King for me, it's like, remember who you are. And sometimes you have to go back. Instead of giving advice to your younger self, you need to ask her to remind you who you are.
Yeah. We're such
Right.
moms. Listen to us. We're like the meaning behind that moment. I mean, there's also, I mean, how many hats can you stack on top of your head and keep it balanced? And how many should you before it's ridiculous? Unless you're a clown, that answer's not that many. And like, speaking of just deriving lessons from what's all around
Mm,
us, sitting in these sales leadership roles, the times that you were in there, growing at these companies,
mm,
all various stages, you have to be just a wealth of knowledge. And so if you were to take all of the things that you learned and what you saw at small companies, large companies, hyper growth, like being laid off, like, my God, that's a learning. I'm in the layoff camp too, right? And you're like, whoa, I learned a lot. What are some things that you feel like you just pulled out that you're like, these are bits of knowledge that I will always have and take with me from those
yeah.
experiences?
Gosh. It's such a big question.
It's a really big one. I do that. If you listen to I like give people these ridiculous questions and then just pause and wait for them to go, "Oh, my turn. Okay." Guess we can take that off. Yeah, it's like, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a
Right.
time? So we're just
Yeah.
gonna Coming from a plant-based person, I don't eat elephants, but if I did,
Yeah,
if
I
I
would do it
did,
one bite at a time.
I would do one bite at a time.
Gosh, well,
Yeah.
isn't that just like one of the best things? So I mean, and that actually is probably I'll piggyback on what you just said, which is and again, I wish I could say I learned this as a sales leader. As I look back and I kind of put the lens on leadership, it definitely holds true, but I don't think I could quite articulate it in this way, which is getting started. And so this is something that again I've learned from the women that I've interviewed and in watching them, it's so much of what ultimately led to their kind of like getting to a place where they were living in their fullest potential. It was they started something, anything, and it allowed them to gather feedback. And I think especially if you are in an early stage company, one of the best things you could do mindset wise is take the mindset of an experimenter because you're
Mm,
going to have revenue targets, there's going to be pressure, but it's really important to set the expectation up. Part of what we're trying to figure out is what is going to be the best fit. Where are we seeing success? Not everything that we do will be a huge success, but everything we do we can learn from. And so that to me is, but you have to start. You have to be willing to
yeah.
do things and then, set your expectations appropriately that, you may or may not hit the target and that's okay. So I think that's a really big one. And that again, I wish I could say I knew that as a sales leader, but it's definitely one thing that has kind of solidified for me in hindsight. So that's a really big one. I think this is one that was huge for me as a sales leader, which is measure what matters.
Oh my
I
gosh.
mean, I know this has been talked about a lot, but it's so fascinating to me. I think in sales, and especially when you find yourself in a high growth company, there's the word more. We need more. We need more. We need more.
More.
More everything. And more is not always the answer. And so this idea that you want to solve for the root problem, not solve for symptoms. And I'll give you a very like practical example. I was at a company and I was new. And so I was kind of in my diagnostic phase of like, what's happening here? The team was struggling to hit the growth targets and it was I had account executives and account managers and they were struggling to hit growth targets and so they had just hired up a bunch of account executives and majority of the team was coming in like somewhere between 60 and 70% to plan, so that was not going well. It was not good, and so the idea was like, well, we've got to sell more, we've got to get better skills, we need to do more training. Then we took a look at to say like, well, what's happening with these customers that we're selling? And what we realized is in the first 120 days, so 4 months, 40% of the new deals were churning. And so if you think about that,
Oh,
you could solve for we need more, go get more revenue. But what was actually happening is we were hemorrhaging new customers. And in sales, it's a lot easier to keep a customer than it is to go acquire a new customer. And so then we shifted the focus into where are we losing them? Are we selling the right fit? Are we creating an onboarding experience that allows them to realize the value quickly? What is it that we're missing out on? And then the other thing was, we had to implement annual contracts because we didn't have them. So also just, doing
I
some
mean,
process things. But I think that's a really big thing too. It's like looking at the measuring what matters, looking at the numbers, taking a step back and saying what's really going on here, not what are the symptoms. And that it's so easy to fall in that trap. If I may, what I found in our personal lives. So if you're a sales leader who's really proficient at this, you're in good shape because this is a very valuable skill for life, which is if you solve the root problem, there's different data in our personal lives, we don't have numbers. I do miss numbers, and it's really nice. Sales is so black and white. But we have these things called negative emotions. And negative emotions are actually an incredible data set that is vastly underutilized. And I love Dr. Susan David. She's a psychologist who's done a ton of research on emotions and emotional agility. And she talks about negative emotions are guideposts. And what they do is they inform us on what matters to us. And so I'll give an example on a retreat that we had done for Rising Tide. And one of the exercises was go through negative emotions and track them and just kind of document it. And we were talking through, we were using those to help inform values because oftentimes when something triggers us, when we experience a negative emotion, that means there's a value down there. And so she came and she was like, I want to be more patient. She created an aspirational value. We're like, no, we're not doing aspirational values, but let's talk about that. What's making you say you need to be more patient? And she shared how she was snapping at her kids a lot and felt like she was maybe overreacting. It's like, well, okay, tell us more. What's causing you to snap? What's making you so tired? She's like, well, I feel like I'm running around and I'm doing so many things, and I'm exhausted because I've got a lot of commitments. And what we really found is when we peeled back, right? It's like symptom, symptom, symptom. What else? What else? What else? What we found is that she had struggled to set boundaries. And because she had struggled to set boundaries, she had run herself into the ground. And because she had run herself into the ground, she was then snapping at her children. And so it wasn't about being patient. It wasn't about being harder on herself. I need to do more. I need to do more. I need to do better. It was, I actually
Yeah.
need to learn how to say no. So, like, like example of like, I say that's a kind of a big thing is like the measuring what matters, and paying attention to the numbers. That's such a big thing. I'm going to pause there because I actually want to stay on that vein. There's more to it, but I feel like I need to pause and give you a chance to.
I'm just sitting back and I'm like, this is the best. I could listen to you talk about incredible things in a meaningful way all day. Look, it's making me a poet. I'm writing poetry. What you're what you're making me think about though is that things are rarely what they
Mhm,
seem.
mhm.
Whether that is business, life, anywhere, right? Things are rarely what they seem. And I think about my mom. So my mom studied immensely Eastern medicine. And the philosophy behind Eastern medicine is that you don't treat individual parts of the body, you treat the entire body. You don't say, like, oh, because typically if you have knee pain, it's usually a problem in your hips. If you are having consistent stomach pain, it actually might be your kidneys. If you need a root canal, oftentimes that'll present like a headache. If you have ear pain, you might have strep throat, right? And it's like I think about all of these ways that like listening to my mom talk about like things aren't as they seem. When you are sick, when there's something wrong anywhere, you treat the whole body because sickness is cyclical. It is not in one place. It's kind of a bridge over to the professional
Yes.
B2B tech industry, right? If one thing is broken, the whole thing is broken because every element relies on itself. And so you're reminding
Yeah.
me of that we don't look at things in a silo. It's not there's just a
Right,
problem in
right,
ops. There's just a problem in sales. There's just a problem in CS. You treat the whole
right, right.
body.
And I think
Yeah.
about like, as a manager, something that is so important is like, as things are really what they seem. This is such a good mantra to remind yourself of when you're working with people on your team who behave in a way that you did not expect. Because your
Mm.
responsibility is to seek to understand and withhold judgment. Because again, it is not right. It's rarely what you assume it is, and assumptions, much like in sales, can kill all deals. They can also destroy relationships and trust.
Y
And
Yeah.
so I am a big believer of like, when you catch yourself assuming, stop immediately in your tracks and shift into seeking to understand, because especially when people don't behave in a way you expect, it's a really good time to pause and dig in to understand what's really going on. There's usually something bigger there.
Yeah. And I mean, that's a whole path kind of in it of itself is just how many assumptions and guesses we make and then build entire teams and processes off of. And it's reckless with people's lives when we do
Oh,
that too, right? It's like, yeah, there's a skill set to making assumptions, turning them into hypotheses, and then testing them with a pilot. And it's like I could go on an entire speech about how to properly run pilots and do it to your point. Like at the very beginning of this episode, you said, I help organizations learn how to run with human beings and not just, in employees only. Like, how is a human run organization? And to me, we're like tapping on that in this whole conversation of just like, how do you be responsible to the human beings who are fueling your company and not make decisions that are reckless and are going to put them in a bad place? And to me, it feels like everything you're talking about kind of goes back to that root cause of just like being a human being and treating people with the respect that they deserve as other
right.
human beings even while we're at work and we have to hit the number and we have to do all of the things. It's like you never stop
Right,
doing that.
right, right. And it's such it is. I think it's something that is so important in leadership. That's the other, I think, big thing is like just remembering that your job as a sales leader is a tremendous gift. You think about the impact you're having on these people's lives. I mean, they take that home with them. And so you have this opportunity to develop and grow them. I think about people who have had the opportunity to work, and there's something so satisfying and just seeing how they're doing and where they are and how they, kind of what they've gone on to do. But it's also a tremendous responsibility. And so that doesn't mean that you don't have to make hard choices. That doesn't mean that you don't have to do things that you wouldn't necessarily want to do. Like during the pandemic, like having to furlough and riff 65% of my team was gut wrenching. But there's a way to do it where you can honor the individuals, acknowledge what they're going through, and empathize with them and treat them as a human being that's going through something really painful. And so I think it's just such a big piece of, you have this incredible responsibility and also this unbelievable gift to do something really meaningful as a leader and shaping the future leaders.
Well, you're speaking to grief and the fact that human beings have to be able to process grief and process hardship um, in a proper way. And oftentimes as leaders, we feel like we have to convince people that the bullet wound they just got, like, no, no, it's okay. Here's why you should smile about that, right? And it's like, that's, I think, where we come across really inauthentic is anytime there's layoffs or rifts or people aren't performing, they're not doing well, they're going out of plan. Like, there's so much hardship that happens while you are at work. And the job of a leader is to help people process that grief in a professional and an effective way. It is not to make
Right.
it better. It is not to negate their feelings. It's not to convince them that they shouldn't be upset. You don't have the right to do that. You don't have the right to tell someone, you shouldn't be upset about this. And here's why, because that bullet wound is going to be a really cool scar. You could tattoo a sunflower over it when it's gone, right? If someone's like, you just fired me, like, why are you, what? So I think it's that empathy piece that's really big too.
Oh my gosh. Yes, and again, like so you just popped something into my mind that's such a like just made me have like an aha moment, which is like this idea of a letting like we don't sit in things long enough. We don't
Oh,
sit in the discomfort long enough. And this is true right at work. It's like, you're good. Everything's fine. Like, don't worry. Like, right. Like we don't like it's uncomfortable to deal with negative emotions or like, humanness. And we do it to ourselves too, right? I mean, you think about it, it's like, get over this. Like, make yourself busy. Like, like go work on a project. Like, I can't deal with this right now. And there's such value in just sitting, not wallowing, but sitting and allowing yourself to feel what you feel. Take time. And when you have the space to understand what was that? There's so much to be learned when we go through difficult things. But oftentimes we don't pause long enough to get the lesson from them.
and maybe a good place to start that habit if you don't do that frequently actually is at
Mhm.
work. Like that, like work is another opportunity to create healthy emotional behavioral patterns that you can take with you in the rest of your life. Cause when you're talking, I mean, you're hitting me right at an area where I've always kind of needed is I've never felt like I have the time to sit in the feeling because one, I'm an urgent person. I'm unbelievably impatient. I'm highly pessimistic. Like, I'm the last person that is like, "Ooh, that's a feeling. Hold on."
Yep.
Mm. Right? Like, I just don't it's just not natural for me, but it should be, and I am trying to be better at doing that. I'm trying to be better at feeling something, and instead of being like, "I'm gonna react," that's what I do, of being like, "Hold on, I might still react the same way, but then when I do it, it's not a reaction, it is a
Yeah.
deliberate next step versus a reaction. And at work, if you can take more deliberate next steps versus reacting, we get further and our agendas are heard and we feel better and we get where we're going faster, even if that's not where you thought you
Right.
were
And
going to go.
so I'm going to transition us because there's like two things that are really coupled together, which is I see this happening with sales leaders, and it's one of the things that I think has is frustrating. As a sales leader, it was frustrating to me then. As a former sales leader, it agitates me now. It's that especially when something didn't go according to plan, and typically when a number's missed, that's when that like reactive, like we've got to double down, we have to be better. Like you feel this whiplash and this almost panic. It almost feels panic as opposed to like, huh, that did not go as expected. Why not? And actually I think this is one thing that I really loved getting to do at Mind Body, and I had an amazing leader in Aaron Stead who um they called him Steady, because he was just so even keeled, right? One of his best attributes is he was not that yo-yo, kind of volatile high low guy. He was very steady. And what was so powerful about his steadiness is that it wasn't ever about did we miss the number? It was more about what are you doing about it? And so what I loved working with him was, I think especially again in a high growth stage, when you're trying to establish yourself, you can really fall into this illusion that that quarter matters in the grand scheme of things and that is catastrophic. And it's not about that. And so what I think is really kind of, if I segue us into another kind of life lesson that's also a leadership lesson, is that this is why having the right metrics that you're measuring, they should be sounding off the alarm bells early. Like, very rarely in sales leadership, if you are, again, a little bit more established, you've actually got some historical data, should you get blindsided. If you're monitoring the metrics, there should be some early warning signs that things are not trending in the right direction. And so, what you start to do as a leader is you communicate that up. And you don't, yeah, and again, as a woman, I fell into this trap, so I'm gonna call myself out, is
Oh
that
yeah.
I remember, especially early, middle of my career, I didn't wanna say that something was wrong because I thought that I was failing. And so I was like, "I'll fix it," and I didn't wanna say it, and then by not saying anything, it wasn't me who got blindsided, it was my boss. That's not good. And so
Mm.
like measuring what matters and then calling out a problem early on. And again, when you call out a problem, this is true for anybody. I don't care what level you're at. That's fine. What are you thinking about? What solutions might you have? And even if you're not 100% sure, come with some brainstorming things of like, here's what I'm thinking about doing. We got to get back on track because I can say as a leader, I don't care if we're off, but I do care if you're doing something about it. So like if I translate that into personal life, it's a little bit different in the communication piece, but it's still there, which is like taking note of the data, right? There are early warning signs that are telling you something's off, right? It could be those negative emotions. It could be burnout. It could be like you're getting really bad headaches all of a sudden, right? And if we choose to ignore those, advance at your detriment, right? Because at some point you will get blindsided. And so it's starting to pay attention to those, acknowledge them, be curious about them. That's interesting. What is that? Is there something maybe I could start to change that gets that back on track? And catch it earlier than later. But as in your personal life, a lot of times it's going to manifest as those negative emotions, fatigue, burnout, you know, physical pain that you want to do something about it. Don't sit on it and communicate it out of what you need or what you're doing about it so that others around you can support you.
I mean, big. You're actually hitting on one of my pet peeves that new leaders or even leaders who have never had really great coaching do is they think, okay, well, my job is to empower people to solve their own problems. Fair. Sometimes. I mean, we're going to go with like, sometimes that's your job. It's not your whole job. Sometimes, but go on, and they're like, oh, so when they approach me with an issue, I like to say, well, what do you think you should do? And then they pause, waiting for like the sound of clapping and like, that's brilliant. And I'm like, well, I was like, one, that's a really tired management tactic is when people ask you for help and you just say, well, what do you think you should do? I was like, you're gonna get to the point where you're training people to just not ask you for help. You're working yourself out of a job by doing that. Instead, what you're making me think of is there's a big difference between, well, what do you think you should do? And sitting back and then saying, tell me what you've tried already. Right? There's a big difference there because you're triggering the same point of their brain, but you're also eliminating the potential for you to start to solve the issue and have them say, no, I tried that. No, I tried that. No, I tried that. And then you go, well, okay, so what do you need? Right? And it's like it winds up being this contentious back and forth. And
Right.
instead, team member approaches you with an issue and you say, okay, you're coming to me because you need my help. Tell me what you've tried already. Now, if that person is like, I haven't tried anything, then it's like, okay, part of the job of the leader is you need to be doing something about it. You need to be doing anything about it. So today I'm going to help you and I'm going to tell you what you should do. But next time, you're going to
Oh,
do it. And the next time you come over, I'm not going to say, what do you think you should do? I'm going to ask you, what
oh
did you
my
already
gosh.
do? And just know, going to ask you that
Is
every
that
time,
scripted
right?
somewhere?
Big
Is that
difference.
scripted?
Yeah, it is.
It
It
is
is
now,
now.
gosh darn it. I mean, what gold? What gold? Because I
Yeah.
mean, it's like any new skill. Like you oftentimes like when you're coaching, it's an evolution of how you coach. And at first you might have to be more prescriptive. And then it's your responsibility to teach them what you're doing, how you're thinking, what questions you're asking yourself. And then they do it next time and you give them feedback. And then eventually they get to a place where you can say, what do you think? But it's knowing where they're at developmentally too, and taking that into consideration of how you're handling like one size does not fit all in coaching conversation. Oh, I love that so much. It's so brilliant. You're amazing.
You're you're amazing. And actually, I feel like there's so much more. We're just like we've hit the iceberg of just I know what you have to uncover. So at this point, we're gonna have to pivot over to our rapid
Oh gosh,
reveal.
yeah.
But then I want to make sure, I know. We want to make sure that I give people an opportunity to connect with you because I honestly there's so much more that I know that you have. And the when you know that there is a true professional resource, it's when you're talking to them and you get stronger just by being near them, right? You're starting to have that effect on me. Just talking to you is making me go into my archives and pull out things I haven't thought of in a while. And it's like, that's what effective people do for other effective people. So thank
Oh,
you for that. Let's
mm,
pivot to our
oh
rapid
gosh.
reveal if you are down. That was my favorite
Oh
part.
boy.
Love it. All right. I've got 5 questions for you. You have 60 seconds or less to
Mhm.
answer each. I accidentally gave you a real softball for number 1. Feel like I know what you're going to say, but what was the last risk you took that paid off?
Oh my gosh. You
Just
know what's so funny? This totally put me into so this is such a funny one. I have 60 seconds. I originally was not going to answer starting the podcast because I was like, I don't know that it's
yeah.
paid off. And that's just me being overly critical because that's not true.
Stop
Right. So
it.
here's the thing. The podcast was the best thing I did. I did it and I was really nervous, but what has come from it is it turned into this beautiful data set. And I've been able to meet women I never would have met otherwise. You being one of them, that was purely from this podcast. I've gotten to learn. And honestly, every episode that I recorded, it's like whoever I was interviewing just happened to say the thing I needed to hear that day. So I would say that is, yes, softball question. It was absolutely launching Rising Tide in the podcast.
Following your
Yes.
heart. Last risk you took that paid off. Love it. Woo. Number 2. What is an irrational
Oh my
fear of
gosh.
yours?
Oh, this one is interesting in that, and this has been ongoing, but I feel it more heavily now, which is this idea that I missed the window. And so it could be something like I missed the window and I have kids now. And so maybe I can't do the things that I might have done. Or especially with Rising Tide, so much of it is like I'm trying to put this content out. I've been able to learn so much. And so I was trying to get it back out. And like, oh, other people are going to start talking about it. I've missed the window. It's like, that's ludicrous. And I know that because there is no such thing. If there's one thing I've learned from the podcast, right? It's like when you have your North Star, you will find your way as long as you stay focused on your North Star. Like the path might wind a little bit, but there isn't some magical window that disappears at some point. So that's my irrational fear.
Oh, that's a
Mhm.
big one, though. I mean, see, now you've got me thinking about that. Did I miss my Okay, number
No, there's
3.
no window. There's no window.
There
No
is no
window.
window. Yeah. We're all
Yeah.
outside. All right, number 3. Who was the last person to change your perspective?
I really struggled with this one. This one was really tough.
I know.
And I even still, I've kind of contemplated on how I wanted to answer this one because I think I'll use my husband. And what's been really interesting is poor thing, he is very perceptive. And I unintentionally diminished him from a lot of our marriage because he wasn't in tech sales. And he very rarely was wrong. And so what's been really powerful in allowing him to have a voice is like he has actually been very instrumental in helping me update some of these lies that I have told myself about either this ability to make this transition. this ability that like I can in fact succeed in a different path. I started here, great, but like, he's been really huge in helping me kind of rewrite some of the narratives that I was playing over and over again to myself. So I'll give a shout out to the hubs.
I mean, that's a good reminder for me. My husband also was not in tech sales, and I had this moment the other day where I was talking about an advisory call that I was on, and it was a really, really good call. And he's like, "Oh, how was your day?" And I've tried now when somebody asks me, "How was your day?" I try now to not say good or great. I try to give them a really real answer. And so he's like, "How was your day?" And I was like, I had a wonderful day. I had this amazing advisory call where I had a CRO who was redoing comp plans for a CSM team, but he was having a hard time because they just retook a look at their ICP and they're making product changes. And so now they're trying to comp on new product. And he's not really sure like what is fair in terms of attrition and risk management and NPS and logo retention. And he just is looking at me and I was like, so yeah. And he's like, those are words and letters I've never heard put together in a sentence before.
Welcome to the
Yeah.
tech jargon.
And yeah. And he's just like, because he's looking at me blankly, and he's like, and that was a good. He's like, I haven't heard those words put together in that way, but it sounds like it was a good call. And I was like, never mind. And I was like, never mind. You wouldn't understand, right? But it's true. Like, we have to forgive people. Like we get too caught up in this industry thinking everybody
Right.
knows that. Like everybody
Right.
knows. Everybody knows. They
Right.
get it. They don't. Like we're a
Yeah.
bunch of weirdos. It's true. All right. Let's switch the feel a bit. Number 4. What's your ideal
Oh
vacation?
man, this one was so funny. So I actually closed my eyes and I was like, what do I see immediately? And I felt it first, which was, I know, I felt the sun on my skin. I'm sorry. I know that's
Mhm.
not good, but it's true. And
Gotta get
I
vitamin D
know. So
somehow.
it was like I pictured a pool. I had quick access to a cold beverage. Even if I wasn't actively drinking one, I could have one right away if I wanted it. I had a book in my hands and I was looking at the ocean from my pool cabana. And I am a very I've always been this way even before kids. Like I just love to have no commitment, no expectations. We want to go to dinner, we go to dinner. If we want to hang out by the pool all day, we're going to hang out by the pool. It's just like this permission to just do whatever your whims said you could do. And so the backdrop is some beautiful tropical paradise that is everything you could just get to by foot or, maybe on a cart or something, but like minimal logistics, minimal complexity, like just be, exist, quiet, relax.
We have the same ideal vacation. I'd be quietly sitting next to you, not feeling the need to
Right.
converse, but just there should you
Right.
want to, like the
Right.
cold drink. I'm like a cold drink where it's like, I'm here if you want to talk to me. You don't have to. I'll be fine on my own. I've got plenty of ice. I'm gonna be
But I
good.
love that, right? It's a space to just even have that and like indulge that. I love that.
Yeah. And number 5, last but
Mm.
not least, what is your favorite advice to give to
Yes.
someone?
This was another funny one to think about because originally I was like, gosh, I've really tried to get away from giving advice because I find,
Yeah.
the sales coach in me was always like, help extract like often again, right? If you're dealing with somebody who is competent and strong in what they do, like they have the answer within them. And it was Luke, my husband, who was like, "That's it. That's your advice." And I was like, "Holy shit, you're right." Like, so the advice is like, you're the only one who has your answer, right? Nobody else has your answer. So it's oftentimes we want somebody else to tell us, "What should I do? What should I do next? Where should I go? Should I stay? Should I leave?" I'm so sorry to tell you, nobody can actually answer that for you. You can take in inputs, you can let that inform you, but you and only you actually have the answers you need.
Okay. That was beautiful, and it deserves a moment of silence. But then after that, first thing I want to do is just thank you for coming on and sharing such incredible
Mm.
insights, ideas, passion. And like I said, I imagine people are going to want to talk to you, connect with you, listen to your podcast, learn more about what you're doing to help companies be better humans at the
Yes.
forefront. Where can people go if they want to
Yes.
find you?
Okay. So I'm a TikToker now.
Oh,
So come follow
man.
me. If you're on TikTok, come follow me. I've got my new favorite character is Ingrid, the inner critic. She's a real hit. but that's at Rising Tide, or it's Rising Tide Podcast. On Instagram, it's at Rising Tide. You can find me on LinkedIn. And then Rising Tide Podcast is available anywhere you listen to podcasts. If you search for that, you'll find it. And then my website is thisisrisingtide.com. And so you could see more about doing speaking now. I don't talk about it as much, but I do still love working with companies and helping them kind of diagnose what's going on. I just don't talk about it as publicly anymore because it's a smaller part of what I do. But that's me. So come and reach out. I would love to talk to you. This has been such a treat, and I will always have a very soft place in my heart for the tech sales world. It will be forever imprinted on me, and I always will have a special place for it.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you for spending your time with us. It has been wonderful. And to everybody else listening, we will catch you next time on Taking the
Thank
Lead.
you.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Taking the Lead. If you're looking for more inspiring stories from women leaders in B2B tech, then visit us at motionagency.io/takingthelead.